Today is supposed to be the start of our honeymoon, right? Why did you tear up my passport? Just as we finished packing and were about to leave, my husband, in a seemingly crazy move, forcefully tore my passport. His smug face really annoyed me. Honestly, I never planned to go with him in the first place. My intention was to go with my mom. I sensed some tension before we got married, but I had no idea the complicated relationship between my husband and my mother-in-law was this deep. I've never heard of anyone's mother-in-law taking over their honeymoon, at least not in my circle. This unbelievable situation shocked and angered me. But most importantly, I felt really uncomfortable. I started questioning if I made a huge mistake choosing him as my partner. As he brought out scissors and began shredding the passport, I looked at my mother-in-law grinning from ear to ear and thought I needed to get away from here as fast as possible. Unexpectedly, I had the perfect evidence to expose these two. My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old and have been working for 7 years. Recently, I got the proposal I'd always dreamed of from my boyfriend of 4 years. And now I'm in the middle of planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband after I started working. I've always been the low-key type. And though I had my first boyfriend in college, it seemed he lost interest in the quiet and not-so-exciting me, and we drifted apart. Years passed without me dating anyone seriously until I started working. I never imagined that out of all my colleagues, I'd be one of the first to get married. My husband was a senior at my company when I was a newbie, and he always supported me whenever I struggled with unfamiliar tasks at work. The only guy I dated in the past was a classmate, but there's something about someone 5 years older. I found my husband dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was over the moon. I still cherish the dolphin figurine we bought during our first date at the aquarium. When he said he wanted to date with marriage in mind, I felt like I was on cloud 9. We went on many dates, and he proposed to me at the same aquarium where we had our first date. Can I really be this happy? That night, I was so thrilled that I couldn't sleep, and I still remember that feeling. With my head still in the clouds, we quickly decided to visit his parents' home the following week. However, it was during this time that I began to feel uneasy about the idea of getting married. My father-in-law was very kind, but my mother-in-law seemed to disapprove of me. Hearing her say, "You could have married someone more outstanding than this plain girl," at our first meeting filled me with doubt and anxiety about our future life together. But I told myself that pre-wedding jitters are normal, right? So, I pretended that everything was fine and continued with the wedding preparations. One day, while discussing our life after marriage, both my husband and his mother assumed I would be quitting my job. Although I once admired the idea of quitting work after getting married, it didn't seem like an option for me at this point. Looking back, I realized that my ongoing anxieties about marriage stopped me from considering leaving the place where I felt most secure, my job. Despite dodging persistent suggestions from my mother-in-law to quit, I decided to continue working at the same company alongside my husband. During our wedding preparations, we disagreed on the timing of our official marriage registration. He wanted to formalize things sooner, and in the end, we decided to respect his wishes and registered shortly after. The procedure felt mundane, but realizing that we were now officially married brought me immense happiness. We initially discussed having a small, intimate wedding, but it seems my husband mentioned this to his mother, and she called the next day. "You know, Edward's wedding, and you're talking about having a small, intimate ceremony. Please don't just say whatever you want. The wedding needs to be grand. I'll make sure it's fitting for Edward. By the way, please keep your guest list minimal, just your parents and close friends. Your friends are probably just as dull, right? They'd make the wedding feel so gloomy and ruin everything." I found myself bombarded with opinions about the venue and the guest list. It was infuriating that she felt she had the right to dictate so much. Despite having a lot to say, I convinced myself that maybe this is just how weddings go and decided to invite only my parents and close friends, as my mother-in-law wanted. However, my mother-in-law's interference didn't stop at the guest list. She had opinions about the program, entertainment, decorations, and food. Following her suggestions would push us way over budget. Initially, Edward's family had agreed to cover half of the wedding costs, but somehow that changed, and now it was, weddings are for the bride, leaving us significantly over budget. I had to cover all the additional expenses she wanted, so the wedding turned into a lavish affair, quite the opposite of the simple ceremony I had envisioned. I tried to make some cost-saving changes without her knowledge, but she scolded me, claiming, "It looks cheap because you didn't do as I told you." I thought I would finally get some distance from her after the wedding, but my husband did something unimaginable. Despite my frustration with her interference in the wedding, and despite my desire to keep my distance from her, my husband insisted we live with her. Our new place, for which we had already signed a lease, was canceled without my knowledge. All my belongings intended for that place were redirected to my husband's family home. I was speechless, shocked by how everything had been decided without consulting me. I had handled all the wedding planning, and even when I warned Edward that meeting all of her requests would exceed our budget, he ignored me. The anxiety I had before the ceremony only intensified after our wedding. We had planned an overseas honeymoon to a dream destination I've always wanted to visit. The idea of going there for our honeymoon felt surreal. However, my growing unease with Edward, who was acting suspicious, and the prospect of living with my mother-in-law upon our return dampened my spirits. Despite our wedding preparations, Edward wasn't cooperative about the honeymoon planning. Strangely, he took charge of booking the flights and hotels. I assumed he had chosen a romantic hotel for our honeymoon stay, and was excited as usual. Even though I had to cover all the expenses, the pre-wedding excitement made me grateful that Edward was contributing, even if just a little. Little did I know that this was a foreshadowing of a shocking event. The wedding ended, and amidst the chaos, our honeymoon day arrived. Despite lingering feelings about the wedding and the upcoming cohabitation, I was determined to shift gears and enjoy the trip with the man I loved. As I woke up in the middle of the night to get ready for our flight, Edward dropped a bombshell. With an air of casualness, he said, "Sarah, I'm going to go with my mom," just as I was double-checking our luggage. I was shocked and couldn't grasp what he had just said. "What are you talking about? It's our honeymoon, not just any trip. Why would your mother be joining us? Plus, we've only paid for 2 flight tickets and a hotel." Visibly shaken, I tried to make sense of his reasoning when Edward hit me with another surprise. "I never mentioned going on this trip with you, did I? Don't be ridiculous. I'm going with my mom. A trip with her takes precedence over a honeymoon. It's a gratitude trip for all she's done for me. You stay here and prepare the house by cleaning every nook and cranny." With that, Edward forcibly tore apart my passport that I had entrusted to him. I was in disbelief, unable to say a word, just witnessing my passport being destroyed. At that moment, my fully made-up mother-in-law barged into our room without knocking. "Edward, are you ready?" Seeing her, Edward's face lit up. "Yeah, we're good. Finally, we can go on this trip without any interruptions." They both shared a gleeful laugh, leaving me utterly repulsed. I realized I was about to marry an absolute nightmare. While I have been contemplating how to get along with my mother-in-law in our upcoming married life, this exceeded my wildest thoughts. I understand now the kind of people you two are. I couldn't help but speak out, but my words seemed like nothing more than sour grapes to them as they laughed heartily and left together. I had been happy that Edward was helping a bit with our honeymoon, but it turned out he was preparing to go with his mother. He had taken charge of the flight and hotel bookings willingly because he was booking everything under his mother's name from the start, and he dumped all the costs on me. The betrayal from my husband was a heavy blow, but my anger overshadowed the sadness. The dreamy, intimate wedding I had always envisioned and the honeymoon, meant to be the best memory with the one I loved, were both once-in-a-lifetime events, now ruined by my mother-in-law and my husband. Overwhelmed by my situation, I couldn't believe this was happening. Initially, I couldn't accept it, but soon after, I decided I needed to act fast and get a divorce. Interestingly, I had something that would be useful for the divorce. Initially, I started recording with the intent of preserving memories of the most significant events of my life. my wedding, and honeymoon. Since the wedding preparations, I had been recording audio, capturing various moments. What started as a pure desire to cherish our wedding memories gradually turned into documenting my mother-in-law's malicious actions and harassment. I often thought of quitting, assuming I'd probably never watch these recordings again, but it's ironic how useful they turned out to be. Just a few days ago, I had moved in and was still unpacking. Now, I began to repack my stuff. Ironically, I hadn't opened much, so packing was done in no time. I wondered if my husband and his mother were at the airport by now. The very thought filled me with indescribable anger, so I tried not to dwell on it. Despite only being there for a few days, I wanted to erase any trace of my presence in that house, so I cleaned thoroughly. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon something shocking. It was evidence that my husband was embezzling money from his company. Given his position in charge of company sales, he was reporting lower earnings to the company and pocketing the difference. And apparently, his mother was in on it too. She had meticulously noted the actual sales, the amount pocketed by my husband, and even listed all the luxury bags, clothes, and shoes he had bought for her with that money. It was a significant amount. Leaving such a diary in plain sight in the living room, I really couldn't fathom what they were thinking. Discovering my husband's misdeeds, I was horrified, realizing the gravity of the situation. For a moment, I wondered if working at the same company could somehow smooth things over. But then I thought, why should I help someone who ditched me for a honeymoon with his mother? I headed to the company with evidence of embezzlement. Though they were supposed to be on their honeymoon, having both taken paid leave, my colleagues were shocked to see the very person in the office. Everyone was asking, what happened? Weren't you on your honeymoon? No longer feeling the need to hide anything, I told them that my husband and my mother-in-law had gone on the honeymoon instead, that my passport was torn up, and that I had paid for the entire honeymoon. My colleagues, superiors, and boss were shocked and angry at my husband. I expressed my gratitude to my concerned colleagues and headed towards the executive area of the company. Unbeknownst to my colleagues, husband, and mother-in-law, one of the top executives in this company is my uncle. I intentionally kept this fact hidden to avoid any perception that I got the job through connections. I applied to the company without disclosing my relation to my uncle and earned the position based on my own merit. Since my uncle doesn't handle human resources, I reached out to him before the orientation and requested that he keep our relationship confidential at work. Despite his surprise, he praised my efforts and assured me that our interactions would be like any other executive and employee. My uncle, who doesn't have children of his own, has treated me with affection since I was a child. Until elementary school, my sisters and I went on several trips with just my uncle. During my childhood, I would sneakily ask my uncle to buy things for me, leading to scoldings from my parents. That's how much he adored me. Since joining the company, our work areas have been entirely separate, and after briefly exchanging smiles during the orientation, we haven't met. I knocked on my uncle's office, explained the situation to his secretary, and was granted entry. My uncle greeted me with a beaming smile, but quickly turned somber. "Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon?" Seeing my dear uncle's familiar, kind face, I was overwhelmed with emotion and burst into tears. Through my sobs, I recounted everything that had happened, and he became visibly enraged. It was a side of him I had never seen before. Of course, I shared the details of my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle pledged to convene a board meeting immediately to address my husband's actions. Then he asked, "What are you going to do today? Head back home." I nodded, and he said, "Well, before you do that, let's grab some good food. I'll drop you off at home afterward." Despite the incredible betrayal of having my honeymoon taken over by my mother-in-law, I felt genuinely grateful, knowing there were still warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. A week later, when my husband and his mother returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I received an immediate call. My husband was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport and hadn't cleaned the house as instructed. he ranted about my whereabouts. I already had a top-notch divorce lawyer recommended by my uncle and parents, and the process was in motion. Without giving my husband a chance to speak, I said, "You too sure are loud and annoying. I don't want to hear your voices anymore. Why would I pick up someone I'm going to divorce, and why would I follow your silly orders to clean?" He was momentarily speechless, but soon resumed his ranting. "Do you think it's okay for you to say such things? I did you a favor by marrying you. If I divorce you, you'll never get remarried. My mom's furious too. If you come back now and prepare our meals, I might forgive you. We're tired of foreign food. Make some tasty traditional meals." He had never spoken to me like that before our supposed honeymoon. After revealing his scheme with a passport and going on a trip with his mother, his true colors had shown. It dawned on me that I had never truly seen him for who he was. I have been reflecting on this realization over the past few days. I've consulted a lawyer regarding our divorce. Could you please discuss related matters with them? A lawyer? What are you talking about? I'm not getting a divorce. I could hear his mother in the background shouting for him to hand her the phone, calling me names. Well, do what you please. By the way, I informed the company about your embezzlement. I think they'll be calling you in soon. Maybe you should get a lawyer too. Bye. I could sense his panic on the other end, but it wasn't my problem anymore. He kept calling, so I just blocked his number. My uncle was aware of our honeymoon dates, so right after our call, the company summoned my husband using the evidence I provided. They verified the information and confirmed the discrepancies in the payments. It turned out the amount my husband embezzled was enormous. In front of the company's executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself. He fabricated a story claiming I was the real embezzler, and he had tried to stop me. At that point, my uncle couldn't hold back and shouted, "My niece would never do such a thing. We've confirmed that you and your mother committed the embezzlement. You're lucky we haven't involved the police yet." Realizing the jig was up and that I was related to senior management, my husband looked as if he had lost his soul. That day, I went to the company to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues since our marriage had ended so soon after the wedding. Everyone refused, saying they had given them as a token of their blessings. While I was surrounded by this warmth, my ridiculous husband approached. "Why didn't you tell me you were related to the top brass?" "I'm sorry, really. Can we start over?" "Can you ask your uncle to keep me in the company and make the embezzlement go away?" Disgusted, I replied. "Do you even understand what you're saying? Are you okay in the head? Divorce is the only option now. Reflect on your actions and face the consequences." Having said that, I pushed him away, but he must not have had anywhere else to turn. He clung on desperately. Watching this, my colleagues called security, who dragged him away. He was fired immediately. Regarding the embezzlement, it seems the company is seeking damages from my husband. After finding out about the whole situation, my mother-in-law repeatedly tried to contact my family. However, once she consulted my sensible father-in-law, the calls stopped. I had always wondered why my sensible father-in-law had even allowed our honeymoon in the first place. But when he later came to apologize, admitting his mistake, I understood. After hearing his side, he had believed my mother-in-law was going on a domestic trip with her friends. He was looking forward to a week without my nagging mother-in-law, who was always badgering him about shopping and wanting to dine out, thinking it would be like a little slice of heaven. Then I came home. After hearing about the ridiculous actions of those two, my father-in-law agreed I should return to my parents' home and even helped me pack. At the time, our emotions were high, and without discussing much else, I just went back to my family home. Knowing how genuine, kind, and rational my father-in-law is, I'm sure he would have stopped all this if he had known. He was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Although I was the victim, the thought that my honeymoon had been hijacked by my mother-in-law was incredibly embarrassing. I contemplated resigning from my job, and my parents suggested taking a break from work for a while. However, my uncle, considering that work might serve as a distraction, discussed it with the CEO. They arranged for me to be transferred to a branch office. The divorce process with my husband went surprisingly smoothly, thanks to an excellent lawyer. Later, I discovered my father-in-law's involvement. When planning our wedding and discussing expenses, it turned out my husband had almost no savings. My in-laws, an average working-class family with my mother-in-law's wasteful spending habits, had minimal savings, as my father-in-law ruefully mentioned. Considering the short duration of our marriage, the alimony was substantial, and surprisingly, my father-in-law sold a family home to cover it. Their home was not in a city center, but in a close-knit community. On the day I was supposed to leave for our honeymoon, I returned to the family home, luggage in hand, and with neighborhood gossip in play. Rumors quickly spread. The stories grew exaggerated, making living in that area unbearable. Initially, my mother-in-law, always concerned about appearances, approved of our marriage because both my husband and I worked for prominent companies, a status symbol for her. Now, with rumors circulating due to her actions, she likely couldn't bear to live in that house. My father-in-law probably also felt responsible for covering the damages from my husband's embezzlement. While I hold nothing but disdain for both my husband and mother-in-law, I genuinely feel sorry for my father-in-law. After being fired and ordered to pay damages, coupled with my not returning as he hoped, my husband apparently suffered a mental breakdown, unable to work. He seems to be moping around in a small apartment he moved to. Seeing her beloved son so downcast, my mother-in-law also retreated, becoming reclusive. As my father-in-law told me, he was, in fact, fed up with my mother-in-law and considering divorce, not wanting to spend his later years with her. He asked if I could introduce him to the lawyer I had used. I immediately contacted my uncle, who got in touch with the lawyer. It might take some time, but I hope my father-in-law can live the life he wishes. Thanks to the intervention of the company's CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a branch office where I'm surrounded by colleagues and superiors who have been incredibly supportive. I'm eternally grateful to my uncle. The only regret I have is missing out on the country we plan to visit for our honeymoon. Once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip abroad.
My name is Julia, a person known for her 99% seriousness. Yet here I am, standing outside my home, accompanied only by a solitary suitcase, hastily packed with my bare essentials. Clutched tightly in my hand are two ominous envelopes. It was on the cusp of early summer, the most enchanting season of the year, when I found myself abruptly ousted from my in-laws' residence. There was no forewarning, no hint of the impending storm. Enticed by the delightful aroma drifting from the kitchen, I completed my usual morning routine and descended the stairs, eager for breakfast. The tantalizing scent promised a feast, typical of my housemate's culinary prowess. Today, it seemed, breakfast was served American style. Brimming with anticipation, I pushed open the living room door, only to be greeted not by a sumptuous meal, but by an unexpected confrontation. "Julia, you deceived us," my mother-in-law's accusing voice pierced the air as tears welled in her eyes. Her words, laden with betrayal, echoed incoherently, accusing me of treachery and shattered trust. After delivering her accusations, my mother-in-law departed, leaving behind a lingering glare heavy with resentment. Meanwhile, my father-in-law remained, his gaze burning with simmering fury. "What's going on?" It was all I could muster, my confusion mounting. I couldn't fathom why my in-laws were suddenly treating me with such hostility. Just yesterday, we were on amicable terms, much like with my own parents. As I grappled with their inexplicable behavior, my husband Ryan, who had been silently consuming his breakfast, caught my eye. "Last night," he began, explaining that he had opted to spend the night at our other residence near his workplace, leading me to believe he wouldn't be present this morning. Had he returned home late last night? Desperate for clarity, I rushed to Ryan, seeking his assistance. "What's wrong with Mom and Dad?" My words caught in my throat just as I was about to utter, "They're behaving." But my attention shifted abruptly to Ryan, whose demeanor had taken a chilling turn. His gaze pierced through me, laden with accusation and contempt, a far cry from the warmth and kindness I was accustomed to. "Ryan, how could you?" The words spilled from his lips, dripping with venom. Gone was the gentle melody of his usual speech, replaced by a harshness I had never encountered before. This was the same Ryan who would surprise me with my favorite flowers whenever his work kept us apart. "I'm sorry. I truly wish we could still travel together," he continued, his words a stark departure from the sentiments he had expressed just a week prior. With a gesture to the secretary, who stood nearby, he signaled for action. "Take care of it," he instructed, the command delivered with an air of finality. "You've finally done it, Julia, haven't you?" His accusation hung heavy in the air, stabbing at my core. "Married me for the money, didn't you?" "What? You've taken my mother's money," I protested, disbelief lacing my words. "Wait, that's not true." The accusation hung heavy in the air, the enormity of the alleged sum sinking in. "And now you're trying to justify it." My father-in-law's voice was laced with scorn. "What? What on earth are you talking about, Dad? I swear, I didn't touch a penny of her money. Get out of this house." "Dad, what's happening?" I pleaded desperately for clarity, but received only a curt denial in response. It seemed I was being accused of embezzling a significant amount from my mother-in-law, a notion utterly unfounded in reality. I begged for understanding, for someone to believe me, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. A chill ran down my spine as the secretary reappeared, clutching a suitcase, likely containing my belongings. "Please, Ryan, listen to me," I implored, but he shook his head with a disappointed expression, as though delivering lines in a tragic play. He was convinced of my guilt. "These are the divorce papers," he stated matter-of-factly, thrusting them towards me. "Once you've signed them, send them back to me." "What? Why?" I exclaimed, my voice trembling with disbelief. "I can't live with someone solely interested in a family inheritance. It's the family's decision." Ryan's words cut through the air like icicles, sending shivers down my spine. "Now, leave. It's not fair. I haven't done anything," I protested vehemently, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. Ryan's demeanor remained stoic as he commanded his secretary, "Ensure she never returns to this property." "What? What's happening? Stop." I struggled against the secretary's firm grip as he forcibly escorted me out, my suitcase in tow. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the tumult of emotions swirling within me. Coming from humble beginnings, I knew the allure of wealth, but I was never one to resort to deceit. The grandeur of the mansion felt like a cruel contrast as I was unceremoniously ejected onto the street, barely half an hour after waking. Was this a nightmare? My mind raced, struggling to comprehend the surreal turn of events. Amidst the chaos, the imposing door slammed shut mercilessly. Just before it sealed me off completely, the secretary thrust another envelope into my hand, a final act of cruelty. "This is also from Mr. Ryan. Please take it." The secretary's voice broke through the tense silence. With a finality that matched the closing of the door, the lock clicked shut, sealing my fate. With trembling hands, I peered into the envelope, my heart sinking as I beheld its contents. A severance payment of $10,000. I had married Ryan 3 years prior, finding employment as an advisory accountant at the company where my father-in-law held the reins as CEO. Despite just passing my CPA exam, I was relegated to a subordinate role, more of an assistant to my colleagues out of pity. Then, one fateful day, everything changed. The pieces of the puzzle began to align in a way that didn't make sense. Something was amiss. Driven by a desire to prove myself as a competent CPA, I had delved into a task assigned to a colleague, only to uncover a web of deceit. My colleague had been manipulating the books, siphoning off hundreds of thousands of dollars. In that moment, a mixture of exhilaration and dread coursed through me. Yet I knew I couldn't turn a blind eye to such wrongdoing. Summoning my courage, I made the difficult decision to report the fraud to my father-in-law, the CEO. As someone deeply committed to honesty and integrity, turning a blind eye was never an option for me. Though the thought of reporting the fraud to the IRS crossed my mind, I hesitated. After all, such a drastic action would strip my colleague of their CPA status, a consequence I found difficult to reconcile with, especially after my own hard-won journey to becoming a CPA. My father-in-law, a shrewd businessman who had amassed a considerable fortune in a single generation, had been unwittingly targeted. "Thank you, Julia. We're indebted to you. Without your intervention, who knows how long they would have continued siphoning off funds." My father-in-law expressed his gratitude, his wife echoing his sentiments. I found myself celebrated as a hero, as if I had single-handedly saved the day. Julia, if you're not involved with anyone at the moment, would you consider marrying our son? The proposition caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but wonder if such flattery was commonplace among the wealthy. Though I laughed it off at the time, little did I know that my father-in-law's suggestion held genuine weight. Before I knew it, I found myself being introduced to their son, a man who praised me for safeguarding the family's assets. Bathed in their praise, I couldn't help but feel a sense of validation. After years of being criticized for my seriousness, it seemed that living authentically and earnestly had finally paid off. And in that moment, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of happiness. As a trainee CPA, I had never imagined ascending to the role of official advisory accountant, let alone being appointed as personal secretary to Ryan, the CEO's son. Ryan embodied the archetype of privilege, perpetually optimistic with a laissez-faire attitude that initially grated on my meticulous nature. Yet, amidst his dependency on me, I discovered a sense of fulfillment in aiding him. "Ryan, you really need to leave for the business meeting soon," I reminded him, checking my watch. "I'll manage just fine. You should get going." "Are you sure you won't stress out the driver this time?" he teased, flashing a charming smile. "I've got everything under control," I assured him, ushering him towards the door. Perhaps he appreciated my attention to detail more than I had realized. Our relationship evolved from professional to romantic, much to the delight of my father-in-law, who had harbored hopes of our union. The wedding was met with resounding approval, and for 3 years, the dynamics between Ryan, myself, and my in-laws remained largely unchanged. The most significant shift came with my father-in-law's decision to pass the company's reins to Ryan. As preparations for his ascent to the boardroom accelerated, my mother-in-law and I found ourselves immersed in a whirlwind of meetings and social engagements. Tonight was meant to be no exception, with a business partner's anniversary party on the agenda. Instead, I found myself alone in a sterile hotel room, a stark departure from the anticipated festivities. In the heat of anger and frustration, the thought of retreating to my parents' home briefly crossed my mind. But the notion didn't sit right with me. If Ryan wanted a divorce, so be it. But as someone who prides herself on honesty and sincerity, leaving under a cloud of suspicion was unthinkable. Seated on the bed, I revisited the contents of the envelope, divorce papers, and a severance payment. Despite the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me, I fought to maintain composure. I needed clarity. With a steadying breath, I closed my eyes and reaffirmed to myself, I haven't taken a penny of my mother-in-law's money. That's a fact. If not me, then who? The rush of excitement and fear surged once more. Gathering the bundle of $10,000, I resolved to make good use of it. After a quick touch-up of my makeup, I made my way to the private detective's office. A week later, my phone rang. "We have the results of the investigation." I arrived at the office, greeted by a stack of papers on the reception table. The report, thicker than anticipated, sent a shiver down my spine as I flipped through its contents, my hands trembling with anticipation. "What? Huh?" Each revelation in the report left me reeling, my head spinning as I absorbed the shocking truth. Exiting the building, I was greeted by an unpleasantly brisk breeze, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling within me. Collapsing beneath the shade of a nearby street tree, I grappled with the weight of the newfound knowledge. Passers-by cast curious glances my way, oblivious to the internal battle raging within me. With resolve coursing through my veins, I made my way to my in-laws' home, determined to confront them. Why was she allowed inside? My father-in-law demanded, his voice laced with disdain as he berated the maid. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, presenting the signed divorce papers. "I've brought these," I stated firmly. "You instructed me to mail them. If you seek a divorce, I won't stand in your way." But I refused to be labeled a thief, I continued, my voice unwavering. Snatching the papers from my grasp, my father-in-law turned to leave. But I refused to let him go without a final declaration. "I demand an apology from all of you," I asserted, my words echoing through the room. "If you're unwilling to acknowledge your wrongdoing, I'm prepared to pursue this matter in court." As the prospect of legal action loomed, my father-in-law halted in his tracks. "I was pleased when you accepted me, despite my humble background. I held genuine affection for you and your mother-in-law," he confessed, his voice tinged with remorse. Summoning my courage, I drew in a deep breath, my fists clenched at my sides. Then, with a measured exhale, I spoke. "I'm telling you, I'm innocent. Do you understand? Let me be clear. I didn't do anything, I reiterated, striving to maintain composure. What? What do you mean? I didn't. My mother-in-law's voice, seemingly emerging from the shadows, pierced the tense atmosphere with confusion etched across her features. I mean exactly what I said, I affirmed, extracting the investigation report from my bag and passing it to her. Please take a look. What? What's this? What's going on? Their eyes widened as they devoured the contents of the report, their expressions teetering on the brink of disbelief. The person responsible for stealing my mother-in-law's money. It was Ryan, I revealed, the weight of the truth heavy in my words. Before our marriage, Ryan had developed a reckless habit of overspending. He used to justify it by saying, "We have enough family wealth to live extravagantly for a lifetime." He indulged in frequent trips abroad, particularly enjoying gambling, often wagering hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. Even his own parents had grown increasingly concerned, implementing measures to curb his access to their funds. They admonished Ryan, urging him to earn his own income. However, old habits die hard, and Ryan, consumed by his penchant for extravagance, sought out alternative means to sustain his lifestyle. That's when he concocted the embezzlement scheme that I ultimately uncovered. Ryan had manipulated my former colleague, who served as my father-in-law's accounting consultant, into falsifying the books. Mistakenly attributing the embezzlement solely to my former colleague, I reported it to my father-in-law without probing deeper, never uncovering the true mastermind. In reality, all the embezzled funds were lining Ryan's pockets. When the truth about my former colleague's embezzlement came to light, Ryan and his parents expressed gratitude towards me, but beneath their facade of appreciation, I sensed a simmering resentment. Was there a romantic involvement between the accountant and Ryan? It seems more like an affair, doesn't it? After all, she was married at the time, someone speculated. Nevertheless, Ryan professed his love for her, convincing her to embezzle funds for their future together. Another voice chimed in. As a consequence of her actions, my former colleague was terminated from her position and faced divorce from her husband, who had reached his breaking point. Despite obediently complying with Ryan's selfish request to keep his involvement under wraps, he ultimately wedded me. His persuasion tactic was clear: distract his parents by marrying a financially prudent partner like myself, thereby easing their suspicions and enabling him to continue his scheming. And indeed, his plan unfolded seamlessly. With my reputation for uncovering discrepancies, my in-laws relaxed their vigilance regarding Ryan's extravagant spending, simply because I was his wife. Mother-in-law, why did you believe I stole your money? I questioned, my voice tinged with disbelief. Ryan told me he entrusted you with my card, Julia, she confessed, avoiding my gaze. I felt a pang of betrayal as her words sank in. Ryan, he's been taking his responsibilities seriously lately, and I thought there might be occasions where it wouldn't be convenient to pay in cash, so I allowed him to carry my credit card. But then he said, I mustn't use it recklessly, so I'll have Julia manage it. And so, her voice trailed off, her expression clouded with regret. So, because of that, I was accused of theft, I interjected bitterly. Just to clarify, Ryan never mentioned any of this to me. Caught off guard by the realization of her son's deception, my mother-in-law's features fell slack with disbelief. By the way, mother-in-law, have you read about what your stolen money was used for? I pressed, seeking to redirect the conversation. I don't understand anything anymore, she admitted, her voice laden with confusion and distress. My mother-in-law's voice trembled, barely audible over the weight of her emotions as tears welled up in her eyes. I returned the report to them, bracing myself for their reaction. The purchase of a condominium, my mother-in-law murmured, her voice laden with disbelief. Let me see that, my father-in-law interjected, his brows furrowed in confusion. But Ryan already has another house near his office. Why would he buy a condo for the senior accountant? It's becoming clear now. Ryan has been entangled with her all along. Lately, he's been spending an unusual amount of time at the other house, likely staying with her. Ryan has always been with that woman. He loved her more than he ever loved me, Julia, my mother-in-law confessed, her words heavy with heartbreak. I remained composed, devoid of emotion, having already processed the nauseating contents of the report countless times before this moment. It appears Ryan has been indulging in quite the affair with the senior accountant. They even frequent underground casinos. I added matter-of-factly. Underground casinos? Please take a look at the last page, my mother-in-law urged, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. My father-in-law frantically flipped through the pages of the report, his brows furrowed in concern. "What's this staggering amount?" he exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "He's deeply involved with the underground casino. It seems he'll be grappling with debt for the foreseeable future," I explained solemnly. "Underground casino." My father-in-law's voice trailed off as he sank to the floor, overcome with shock. "Just to be certain, none of our other cards have been compromised, correct?" I inquired, prompting my father-in-law into action. "Huh?" His eyes widened in realization as he rushed to the nearest telephone, panic evident in his movements. "Stop everything. Cancel that card immediately." His urgent command reverberated throughout the house. Later, I received a formal apology from my in-laws. They expressed regret for concealing their son's extravagant spending and his affair. While I appreciated their honesty, I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Their apology seemed incomplete without addressing the hurt they caused me. Nevertheless, I handed them the completed divorce papers. With a small nod, I began to gather my belongings, ready to leave. But as they pleaded for me to stay, their sudden change in demeanor caught me off guard. Just a week ago, they had treated me like a criminal. "I'm sorry, but isn't it a bit late for that?" I interrupted, my voice tinged with frustration. "I loved you both and considered you family, but you disregarded my feelings and opinions. Do you have any idea how hurtful that was for me?" Despite my efforts to remain composed, a solitary tear betrayed my emotions, quickly followed by a cascade of tears streaming down my cheeks. "Julia." The divorce papers lay before us, a stark reminder of the irreparable rift between us. "This divorce is what your son desires. Shouldn't we respect his wishes?" It was evident that he had moved on with someone else. After composing myself and injecting a final touch of sarcasm, an abrupt alarm pierced the silence, jolting us all. Startled by the sudden noise, I furrowed my brow in confusion, only to have my father-in-law grasp my wrist urgently. "Hey, what's going on? What are you doing?" I questioned, taken aback by his sudden urgency. "You should come too, honey," he insisted, leading me outside to the garden. There, the gate that had shut me out just a week ago stood before us, and we heard a voice from the other side. "Hey, the gate won't open. Is anyone home?" Ryan's frustrated voice echoed through the gate, followed by the sound of him banging on it vigorously. "What's happening? My car won't start either. This is ridiculous." Ryan's frustration was palpable as the annoying alarm persisted, refusing to cease its blaring. "Listen closely, Ryan," my father-in-law began, his tone firm and unwavering. "Huh? Dad, can you hear me? My key isn't working. Can you unlock it from your side?" Ryan's voice crackled through the intercom, tinged with confusion. "I told you to listen, Ryan," my father-in-law's voice boomed over the intercom. What's going on?" Ryan's tone faltered, sensing a shift in his father's demeanor. "You have no right to open this gate," my father-in-law declared firmly. "What? Why would you say that?" Ryan's voice rose in disbelief. "Isn't it obvious? I didn't think you could be so oblivious. We're aware of everything. All of it," my father-in-law continued, his voice unwavering. Is Mom there too?" Ryan's voice trembled with uncertainty. "Ryan, Julia meant the world to us, but you're a different story. We want nothing to do with you ever again," my father-in-law declared resolutely. What's happening? Mom, are you there? Please say something," Ryan pleaded desperately. "We know that you framed Julia. We know about the embezzlement. We know about your affair and your debts. We know everything," my father-in-law stated, his voice filled with conviction. "Wait a minute. Where did you get such absurd ideas? Stop spreading lies." Ryan's voice cracked with indignation. Ryan's frantic protests continued, but to no avail. Anxiety gnawed at me as I wondered if his parents would be swayed by his words and doubt me once again. However, my fears were unfounded. "I trust Julia." "So do I, Dad," his mother interjected firmly. "Mom," Ryan's voice wavered, betraying his disbelief. "We sincerely apologize. Julia, would you please consider taking my position?" his father implored. "What? Hey, is Julia there too?" Ryan's voice erupted in anger, reverberating through the air. He seemed to be causing quite a commotion. However, his resistance was short-lived as security personnel arrived to calm him down. In the end, I agreed to my father-in-law's proposal. But with one condition, I will always be honest. Can you trust me unconditionally? They both nodded solemnly. A year later. Do you really think I'm cut out for this executive role? I hesitated, lingering in front of the executive office door. My father-in-law gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Despite my divorce from Ryan, I still addressed the CEO as Dad, as we had mutually agreed upon. Julia, what our company truly needs is someone with your integrity and sincerity. It's a perfect fit for you, don't you think? He offered, his smile warm and encouraging. However, I couldn't resist a slightly mischievous question. Do you ever regret letting Ryan go? He should be the one stepping into this role, shouldn't he? Since the incident, my in-laws had distanced themselves from Ryan. Initially, he would often come pleading for financial assistance, but once he realized they wouldn't comply, he stopped. The son who had vanished under the weight of enormous debt. I wondered if he was still with that senior. Ryan let out a small, lonely sigh, but Ryan isn't the one meant for this position. The responsibility was too much for him. We're the ones to blame for indulging him too much, my father-in-law admitted. Dad, I murmured sympathetically. Hey, don't look so disheartened. Stand tall and proud, he encouraged. Yes, I replied with newfound determination, reaching for the handle of the executive office door. As it swung open effortlessly, I stepped inside,